Hello, everyone. My name is Bill Spencer. I work on Microsoft Teams engineering, and today I'm pleased to have the team from SoftLanding who have built a healthcare timekeeping app, uh, and they will demo that as well as answer any questions you might have towards the end. I'd like to introduce Colby Tim, who will be doing most of the presentation, and Eric Fugger, who will also be joining to answer questions. Take it away, Colby.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate it. So just to give you an idea of the type of business problem that we're trying to solve. So this particular client, who's a major healthcare organization in Canada, needed to create a timekeeping app solution that was integrated in Microsoft Teams to help support their users. The reason they didn't go with a pre-built type solution is because the variety of different user types that they needed to support. So we need to create something more customized to fit their needs. So in terms of business problem, it needed to be able to support multiple timekeeping processes across different types of organizations. So as I said, there were different types of users that came into play. For the initial solution that we built for them, we focused on one type of user, which I will talk a bit more about in the next slides. It needed to be expandable, and what that means is it needs to be able to grow and support those variety of users. So the initial kind of solution needs to be able to have the ability to be built on top of it to support other users. Notifications, so a big part of this solution is it uses a Microsoft bot to send notifications to the users, things like overdue timesheets, a timekeeper if they add a note to a user's timesheets, any type of reminders that their timesheets are going to be due. And as well as the ability for those timesheets to be able to be reviewed. So a timekeeper will then review a user's timesheets for each it's broken down into kind of groupings. So like you might have a timekeeper for a department or a sub-department, and so they need the ability to review those. Go to the next slide here. So future editions. So as I said, we needed to build it so that it could grow and improve in the future with V2 or V3 type changes. So for them, the ability to have a type of approval process. So actually, initially, we did build in a approval process for them. So what that means is someone would submit their timesheets at the end of, say, a week. Let's say, and it would go to an approver, and the approver could then decide whether they wanted to approve it or send it back to the user for changes with notes. So that was built in, but it's currently in this stage. It was kind of turned off for this particular user group. Another future addition is kind of an admin view, so being able to add users to various groups, timekeepers, approvers, etc., and as well as add other user types. So as I said, for this particular case, we built it for a user which this organization calls an exclusion user. What that means is any time logged per day is excluded from their day. So if they worked a 7.5-hour day, they logged, let's say, an hour of sick time, they only work 6.5 hours for that day. So the idea is to be able to support other users, like potentially a user like clock in, clock out. So they start and end at a set time. So the solution outcome, we built them a Microsoft Teams native application, and there are a couple of views that were built into it, such as a calendar view, a summarized view, which kind of summarizes the hours from year to day, and as well as the actual interface to be able to enter those timesheets. So just to give you an idea of what that looks like. So here we have the dashboard view. And so in the dashboard, this is where you have your calendar view, which I'll go more into detail in the demo, but essentially you'll notice that there are kind of color distinctions here. So you'll have your due dates for what they call a pay period. So pay period, just like in this case was a week, or sorry, 2 weeks. So you would have your pay period due every 2 weeks. In purple there, those are just your exclusion hours that have been logged. And then in green, we'd have our public holidays. On the right is that summarized view that I spoke about. So this is where you'll see your summarized hours. So let's say I want to get an idea of how much sick leave I've taken from year to day. That would show up over here. The next view, so kind of next tab in the application, is this timesheet view. And so this is where either your general user, in this case what we're calling an exclusion user, would come in and they would page through their pay period and add some time entry to it, and then submit that pay period. And then, as well as if you're a timekeeper for a user group, you'd come in here as well, and you'd have another option to review the various timesheets for your user group. I also spoke about notifications, so this was a key part of the solution as well. So we have a one-way bot that sends notifications. So you can see some adaptive card example here of a reminder that might get sent out to a user, or an overdue timesheet notification that gets sent out. Another example is timekeepers. Timekeepers have the ability to add notes to a user's pay period, and so they can add a note and that'll get sent out to the user to notify them about that note. So now we're just gonna take a look, at the demo.
This is a short demo of the Timekeeping app. So the first page you'll see when you select the Timekeeping app is this dashboard page. In the dashboard page, you have two items that we'll go over. So the first is this calendar view. So the calendar view highlights things like the pay period due date, which is highlighted in red over here, any public holidays that you might have during that month, and as well as your exclusion hours. So for this particular user, they're called an exclusion user, which means that any time that they log in their pay period is an hour that is excluded from their normal work day. So a normal work day for this particular user is defined as 7.5 hours. So you'll notice that, on the 26th, 27th, and 28th of January, this particular user logged some sick time. So they took a full day of sick leave, or full 3 days of sick leave. On the right here, we have this other leave card. This gives you an overview of the summation of each hour type from year to day. So in this particular case, from January, this user has logged 22.5 hours of sick leave and 2.5 hours of paid leave for vaccination. You'll notice if I go back into December, these hours will change. So moving on to the next view. So this is the timesheet view. You'll notice that there are two tabs over here, Timesheet and Timekeeper. So in this particular case, there are two user types. There is a timesheet or a general user, which is that exclusion user, and there they would only normally see this one tab, timesheet. But because this user is also a timekeeper, which means that they can view a group of individuals that are assigned to them. They can view all their timesheets per pay period, and I'll go into a little detail when I click in there. But just to let you know that that's why you see these two particular tabs over here. So to go over the first tab, the Timesheet tab, you'll notice that at the top here, they can see which pay period they're in, and you can page between pay periods. You can also do a drop down and select between multiple pay periods. In addition to that, you can add items to your pay period. So in this particular case, you'll notice that this button, Submit Pay Period, is grayed out. The reason it's grayed out is because this particular pay period has been submitted. So if I go forward in time, I can add a time entry to this pay period. So remember, this is an exclusion user, so any time entered is excluded from their normal workday. So for instance, let's say I took vacation on this particular day. I took a full day vacation. In this particular case, these users can only enter by 0.25. If they entered a number like 7.11 and tried to add it, there would be an error that states that it can only be by 0.25 increments. So let's just say they did 7.25 days, but perhaps they took 7.5 hours for the day. Let's say they took multiple days of vacation. So instead of having to enter this multiple times, they can go ahead and select the days they took vacation. So they can say Monday was the first day. They can select this date range, which will bring up an end date, and they can select the end date of their vacation. You can also add notes. So notes here. Once you hit add, you'll notice that multiple days got added due to that date range, as well as all of them got propagated with that with those notes. The user can also edit their timesheet. So you hit the three dots and hit edit, and perhaps they want to change the notes here. So they could add other notes, or they could change the type or the hours and hit save. Once that's done, you'll notice it got updated. Once the user is happy with their pay period, they can then decide to hit submit pay period. And again, that grays this particular pay period out. So it's a way of letting the user know that this pay period is now complete. Now, there could be a situation where the user decides that they've made a mistake and they need to adjust their pay period. They can then go ahead and either add a new time entry, or perhaps they want to remove or edit. So they can, let's just say we want to delete this particular one, hit confirm. You'll notice that this button is no longer grayed out. So the user now has to submit their pay period again. So they can make multiple adjustments to this before doing that. So perhaps we want to add another timesheet type here. They can do that, and then they can hit submit. So that kind of goes over the exclusion user. If we go into the Timekeeper tab, again, a timekeeper gets an overview of each user's pay period and the hours logged in said pay period. So you'll notice this number here. So for this particular client, this is how they broke out each user into these groups. So these could be groups like departments or sub-departments that the timekeeper it has to review. So in this case, if I go to our next pay period, which is the one we just submitted, you'll notice that we have our vacation days that we logged, as well as that jury duty. Timekeepers have the ability to modify timesheets, so I can click on this particular timesheet and make modifications to it. you'll notice the only thing that is grayed out are the notes fields. So this is for the user themselves. These are private notes for them. Well, not necessarily private, but they're locked to them to edit. And the one thing you'll notice on the right here is that a timekeeper has the ability to add notes to the pay period for a user. So they can leave notes here and add that note for the user. So once that's complete, the user, if any notes have been added or if any timesheets have been modified, there is an alert that gets sent to the user. So this is when we get into the activity tab. So the activity tab is a it's a notification tab that's sent by a one-way bot. So this bot basically just sends notifications to the user to alert them if there are any notifications such as overdue timesheets. You'll notice right here that notes field I just added came through. So the timekeeper added a note to this particular pay period, and here are their notes that they left for you, as well as the user modified an approved timesheet. So if a user makes a modification to their approved timesheets, that alerts the timekeeper over here. And I think I touched on it, but again, overdue timesheets. So if the user doesn't submit their timesheets by a certain date, they will be notified that their timesheets are overdue and they need to submit that pay period. So hopefully this gives you a brief overview of the app. The app is also built to support approvals as well. So another user type called an approver. And basically the way that works is once a user submits a pay period, the approver gets notified of that submission. They then have to approve that pay period and approve those timesheets. And then once that's complete, it gets sent to the timekeeper. But for this particular situation, the client requested that we remove that functionality for now, as that could be added down the line for other user types.
Thank you very much. So Colby, you want to take us home with the last few slides?
Yep. So the next slide here is the solution architecture. This is kind of a top-down view of the breakdown of this the whole timekeeping app. So in terms of the app itself, obviously it's running in Microsoft Teams. It's using Azure AD for authentication. There are a bunch of function apps that kind of play a part in here. Certain function apps are, might be calling the Azure SQL database. That's where all the information is stored. As well as there's another function app that acts as kind of a middleman to trigger the bot. And so those variety of messages that get sent to the bot are put in an Azure storage queue. So those messages are queued so that we make sure that the bot's not being overloaded with potentially hundreds of messages. And I didn't add it into the diagram, but I put it on the side here. We also have application insights to kind of get logs and an idea of how everything's performing. So just some highlights and learnings from this project. So one of the learnings, kind of major learnings for us, is the Teams toolkit, which we use for development. So we kind of found that there was a limitation when changing the deployment region, but we're able to work with Microsoft to resolve that, and Microsoft was very helpful in resolving any of our issues, which is great. Working in the Slate program, you get to really work closely with the dev team there. So that was super helpful. Highlights, we built an integrated solution. So the great thing about building an actual Teams app in Microsoft Teams is it's very well integrated with Microsoft Teams, and you can use a lot of those resources in the Microsoft Team framework. Simplified notifications, so we try to make them as simple as possible. So we built that bot to send simplified notification cards to the users, and as well as another learning that we came across is when the bot sends a message, it has to get the user context, and so the only way to get around that was we had to grab the user context from app install. So that was just kind of a learning there for us for this particular example. So yeah, that's everything from me. Thank you, everyone.
Great, thank you, Colby. I've got a few questions from the audience. Feel free to add more in the chat, folks. But the first question is, how long would it take to implement a similar solution for another customer?
Yeah, so obviously that depends on the customer needs. So, if we were to go from like a copy of this, it's pretty quick. I mean, it would take less than a week to do. Just because, it's basically deploying to your Azure environment, your Azure tenant, and then tying it into Microsoft Teams, right? But obviously if we're adding different things here and there, that could add to that time. So, potentially you might have different types of user types, etc., or a different type of approval process. So.
And the back end could vary too.
Yes, the back end could vary.
How much integration was there with the existing infrastructure versus a separate system?
So in terms of like the SQL database, is that kind of, yeah. So it's basically calling an Azure function to call those stored procedures, those like stored procedures on the Azure database side. So yeah, I mean, we would just make modifications to the Azure function, the app itself. Code doesn't get changed. It's basically that endpoint layer that we would modify.
Just the wiring in the back in order to integrate with the existing databases that the customer uses.
Yeah, like it's built to easily kind of build out and use different types of backends if needs be. It's not kind of the app itself is not built to only be in an Azure SQL database, for example.
Great. And a rough sense of the cost for duplicating. Again, if it was vanilla, assuming no modifications, because those could run the gamut. Yeah,
so certainly, if you're working along with Microsoft and we're getting funding, the funding will probably cover those costs. Don't want to get into like specific number, but as I said, like, we're looking at like 5 days of effort to make sure that it's deployed properly to your environment around there. And, obviously there's modifications we need to make on your Microsoft Teams to make sure it's installed properly, and the variety of user groups are added, etc. So, yeah.
And this is called a healthcare app, but it really could be used for commercial as well as government enterprises.
Exactly. Yeah. So, this particular customer that we built this for is a big healthcare organization, but, this is every organization has timekeeping, most anyway, to some degree. So this could definitely be used across a variety of organization types.
And is there any concern on scale? Like how many people is in the current organization that this is designed for? And do you see any limits that you'd be concerned about?
I mean, I guess that's the power of building things in Azure, right? Is scale. You can scale up, scale down. there's no real issue there, right? It's just, you know, how much you want to pay per month in Azure, but there's no issue on from a scale standpoint.
Excellent. Great. Well, thank you very much. That exhausts the questions from the participants. Looking one more time to make sure nothing else came in. I appreciate it, Colby and Eric. Any final comments? And again, thank you to the audience for joining us and for your thoughtful questions.
Thanks, everyone.
Anything else? Anything else, Colby or Eric?
All good from my side.
Great. Thank you all very much. We'll wrap up the presentation, and please share this with your colleagues. And if you have any interest in following up, please reach out to SoftLanding at info@softlanding.ca or reach out to your Microsoft account team. Thank you all very much.